Corruption in South Africa has a price, and for the first time in the state capture saga, that price has been paid in a courtroom. Former ANC Member of Parliament Vincent Smith has been sentenced to 7 years in prison, becoming the first individual convicted as a part of the sprawling state capture investigations. The case highlights the shocking scale of corruption that drained public resources and undermined trust in government. But what does this mean for accountability, for governance, and the future of ethical leadership in the country? Well, to help us unpack the significance of this landmark sentencing, we're now joined via Teams by Professor Susan Booysen, an expert in governance and democratic institutions. Prof, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. Well, as we've said in that introduction, Vincent Smith, once a powerful MP and parliamentary committee chairperson. Just how significant then is his conviction in the broader context of South Africa's fight against corruption?
Well, I think yes, indeed. The specific answer to your question we shall only be able to fathom in the coming months and years. The conviction, the plea bargain struck with Vincent Smith and his conviction then are very important milestones in the overall process of government and the state trying to resuscitate credibility, trying to prove there's accountability, responsibility in how public funds are being spent. We will have to see whether it is just one flash in the pan or whether it is actually going to circle out and have implications for many more people. We know that on the type of charges that Vincent Smith had struck this plea bargain, there are other senior politicians in the ANC, very, very senior in fact, who face similar charges. For example, crucial in this case of Vincent Smith was the installation of security systems at his residences, private residences. And other politicians are in that same boat, having received similar benefits. We'll have to see whether it circles out to those other senior politicians, whether it circles out to other cases related to Bosasa, to other cases in the Zondo Commission's report. We know overall there are about 200 persons, politicians, officials, business people mentioned in the Zondo report. So there's a lot of work to do, and expectations are high, and they would have been heightened by this week's deal around Vincent Smith. So there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of proof that will have to be forthcoming before we shall be able to say definitively that the Vincent Smith case was really significant. We have to bear in mind in trying to answer that question too, that there have been close connections between Vincent Smith, he and Angela and Grizi. Grizi and Smith were first arrested on the same day in 2020, nearly 6 years ago now. And this case gained momentum from November last year when a plea bargain was struck with Grizi. Grizi getting an interesting sentence in a way perhaps lighter, can be seen as lighter as that of Vincent Smith. Grizi got 40 years, but totally suspended for a period of 5 years. So no prison time for Grizi. And that was on the understanding, on the condition that he would continue to cooperate fully, truthfully, and be able to give affidavits and be a witness in those cases. So Grizi's plea bargain was really an instigator, forerunner to this case of Vincent Smith and possibly of others too. Yeah. And one could also just mention in answering your question that this particular case also showed good cooperation between the SIU and the investigating directorate. Yeah. And that could bode well for future. developments on that front.
Yeah, and I mean, Prof, in line with your thought process of just how far this sentencing marks this turning point then, in holding politicians accountable, we also, of course, you delve deeper in some of the things that I wanted to touch on. But when you look at, for instance, the Zondo Commission's recommendations, sweeping reforms being recommended there, just how effective are these recommendations likely to be in preventing future corruption, given, of course, just some of the points that you are raising in terms of what likely we are else to see, in the coming months or weeks, but justice is definitely turning, albeit very slow.
Yes, indeed. The wheel is turning slow, and we have to see whether the current developments are just one cog in the wheel or whether the total wheel is really turning. A lot will depend on the exact nature of the evidence that is available, that people like Agrisi would be able to put on the table, and whether that can be pursued significantly and definitively, because so much in the public institutions depends on this. The whole government is currently suffering that credibility crisis, accountability crisis, responsibility crisis on how the public funds are being spent and how much of it is being misappropriated along the way. And so much it will be at stake for public institutions and for government, resuscitating public trust in its institutions.
Yeah.
Because without that, it is really further decay and despondency and delegitimation of the whole system that we will see unfolding further.
Yeah.
So much is at stake. And this commission, Zondo Commission, in retrospect, so much of their recommendations still have to be handled, acted on, and we still need to see what is going to happen. We know quite a number of these high-profile individuals who are facing similar charges to that of Vincent Smith. They have also objected to the findings of the Zondo Commission. So there will have to be developments on how those objections are handled and how they are made to link with forthcoming cases. We can only assume there must be forthcoming cases. If it's just this one and once off and there's now a total halting pause in the further processes, then much of it will really come to nothing, and huge amounts of public money would have been spent on the Zondo Commission without the public seeing benefits of that.
Yeah, Prof, I want to just, perhaps close with, what we heard in that particular, court with Vincent Smith. Perhaps also just give a forward-looking in terms of preventative measures that can be taken, particularly in spaces like Parliament, in spaces like your state-owned entities. I mean, in accepting that plea agreement, Judge Mohammed Ishmael said that he had, to consider that Smith was a legislator entrusted to uphold South Africa's laws, which he had failed to do. He said corruption was a serious problem, as we've been talking, that had reached, alarming levels and must be dealt with firmly. In your view, what are some of the systemic weaknesses that allowed corruption on this scale to take place? And do you think we'll be able to have these addressed in the coming future, especially when you start looking at what's currently before us in as far as the commissions that have been established are concerned?
Yes, indeed. As small as the current developments around Vincent Smith actually are, I believe they can have a bigger, wider impact in due course. If you take the Vincent Smith case and how rife corruption and total misappropriation of funds had been in the past, and it was really part of the culture. That is how almost everybody in government, or at least a large number of people in government, acted, how they saw their leaders acting, it became the acceptable way of doing things. And I think there we see much more of a tide that is turning in South Africa. The case of Vincent Smith, yes, indeed, the fact that he is a public representative and he really betrayed the trust and the responsibilities he had to represent citizens in a truthful and honest way with integrity. That, and the fact that he could be called out on that and convicted on that must have been a huge set of implications for other public representatives. Maybe it doesn't suddenly make all of them honest women and men, but the fact that there are actions and people have been called to account, publicly called to account, found guilty on criminal grounds and sentenced and removed from the system, that will certainly make people public representatives in future think more than twice before they act similarly. But yet, if they can get away with that, if there is chaos in the system, if there is any continuous non-accountability, if continuously bosses act as poorly as their underlings in the public sector, then we need not start hoping for anything. But I think there's a much more public awareness, and hopefully this will be a big wake-up call to those with dishonest intentions.
Prof, a very good afternoon, and thank you so much for that analysis. Of course, Professor Susan Booysen just weighing in there on Vincent Smith's sentencing.